So is lab-grown meat really better? It looks like the people that were all for it just a couple of months back may be regretting their investment. Check this out.
Fake meat is turning into real profit.
Grocery sales of alt protein products have just skyrocketed.
Artificial meat.
We're keeping all the good stuff and trying to leave out the bad stuff.
It will be the meat industry in 20 years.
It got really popular really quickly and then just as quickly lost all that popularity.
Beyond Meat getting a downgrade today.
It's down about 70% over the last 6 months.
It feels like Beyond Meat, for example, didn't grow in the right way.
It's an industry that promised to essentially save the world and is coming up short on that promise.
The only thing I believed in for most of my life was if you're generally unhealthy, you will suffer more if you get ill. So we totally changed our diet. No processed food at all. My family dropped loads of pounds and we usually don't even get sick. We try to include as much color in our food every single day, bright, green, leafy vegetables, fruits, because you know the saying, you are what you eat. It's very true. Do you guys agree? Now let's talk about this cancer burger that's been making headlines lately. So apparently an article from the website News Punch made a pretty surprising accusation about the safety of a meat alternative linked to Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates. The headline? Study. Bill Gates' lab-grown meat causes cancer in humans. The article was shared more than 1,000 times in a week on Facebook. I looked into it, and although the article is mostly false, it raises a bigger question, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this video. But first, let's clarify what the article was really saying. Bill Gates has put money into a lab-grown meat company, but the article gets some facts mixed up. It talks about a bunch of studies, but they're actually about plant-based meat, not lab-grown meat. And the good news is there's no solid proof that lab-grown meat gives you cancer, according to the experts. So lab-grown meat, also called cultivated meat, is basically made by growing animal cells. It's not available for sale in the US yet, but most experts agree that it's not a cancer risk. Some argue that the cells used to make lab-grown meat are kind of like precancerous, but even then, it's next to impossible to get cancer from eating this meat, even if it had those cells. Plus, they really take a close look at the cell lines that they use and carefully choose them for production, so it should all be in good hands. But really, there's something about eating artificial lab-grown meat that kind of puts a bad taste in my mouth. You know what I mean, right? Other prominent cancer researchers said it is essentially impossible to get cancer from eating cultivated meat. But here's the thing, guys. The industry really doesn't have the decades of data to prove it, so it's just trying to avoid the question instead. But then you have Bill Gates backing the deal. Bill Gates, the man who's an expert in seemingly all subjects, while at the same time having a degree in none. Am I right, guys? Make sure you subscribe to the channel and have that notification bell turned on. This is the kind of content that they could take down fast, so the sooner you watch it, the better. You know what I mean? Anyway, thanks so much for the support. Thanks for always watching and hitting that like button. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you guys here on the channel. I mean, Bill Gates, guys. He's the largest landowner in the United States, and one of the more colorful theories revolves around Bill Gates' strange interest in U.S. agriculture, with rumors that the former Microsoft CEO owns up to 80% of farmland in the United States. Amazing, if true, but it's extremely not. In a Reddit Ask Me Anything AMA last week, Gates once again fielded a question pertaining to his AG holdings and stated that he actually only owns about 1/4000th of all U.S. farmland, or about 270,000 acres spread across 18 states. Now, let's not take this lightly. Sure, that's nowhere near 80% of U.S. farmland, but it's still a little more than a third of the state of Rhode Island, a surprising amount for one person and enough to make Bill Gates the largest landowner in the United States. So why does Bill Gates and other billionaires like him keep buying up so much farmland? Gates said that it was his investment group that chose to do this and that it is not connected to climate. Buy land. They aren't making any more of that and all. But then again, you also have Bill Gates saying that plant-based meat is the future. Is this a coincidence? I'll let you guys answer that one. In his 2021 book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, Gates wrote that effectively combating climate change will take people becoming willing to commit to new ideas, like switching to electric cars and, yep, you guessed it, synthetic meats. That same year, Gates argued that wealthy countries that have the resources to do so should move to 100% synthetic beef in order to meaningfully reduce global emissions from livestock. He says that you get used to the taste difference, and the claim is that they're going to make it taste even better over time. Bill Gates and his foundation have financially backed plant-based and lab-grown meat startups such as Impossible, Beyond Meat, and Upside Foods. He's also backed Neutral, a carbon-neutral food startup. Leading scientists agree that cultured meat products won't give you cancer, but the real problem for me is that the industry doesn't have decades of data to prove it, so it's trying to avoid the question instead. If you've chosen to skip meat to reduce animal sufferings or lower carbon emissions, you're in luck because your meatless options have improved a lot over the past decade, which is great news. So for those willing to pay a little bit more, you've got tastier veggie burgers and nuggets from companies like Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods, much better than the old faux meat products. But let's be clear here, these aren't real meat, and some of them are heavy on salt and saturated fats, so maybe not the best for everyday diets. But there's another option on the horizon if you want guilt-free protein. Thanks to the biotech revolution, they're now cultivating animal cells in a petri dish or even on a large scale in fancy stainless steel factories. For years, companies like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson have been growing cells to make vaccines and other biotherapeutics, and now they're suggesting that we eat these cells too. Yeah, that doesn't sound as appetizing as they think. The big three players in this field, Believer Meats, Eat Just, and Upside Foods may have collectively raised over $1.2 billion in funding to bring lab-grown meat to our grocery stores. They've set up research facilities and pilot plants from the Bay Area to the Middle East, producing chicken that's pretty hard to distinguish from the conventionally farmed meats. Upside even got a nod from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, last year to bring their products to market, and all three companies have lined up restaurant partnerships in anticipation of broader regulatory approval. These companies may call their products cultured meat, cultivated meat, or even cell cultured meat. But the key here is the M word. On a cellular level, alternative protein advocates say it's no different. And that's 99.9% true. The big honking asterisk is that normal meat cells don't just keep dividing forever. But to make these lab-grown cultures grow quickly enough for business, some companies, including the big three, are using immortalized cells. These cells aren't something that most people intentionally eat. Immortalized cells are common in medical research, but technically speaking, they can be precancerous and in some cases even fully cancerous. Don't worry, prominent cancer researchers say that because the cells aren't human, it's essentially impossible for people who eat them to get cancer from them, or for the precancerous or cancerous cells to replicate inside people at all. You'd be better off worrying about the nitrates linked with cancer or fecal matter, a source of deadly infections found in farm-raised meat. And cow tumors sometimes wind up in store-bought ground chuck too. Of course, the facts might not matter much if ranchers or other players in the traditional meat industry felt threatened enough to declare a public relations war. It's all too easy to imagine misleading people about chicken tumors and cancer burgers. Cultured meat companies are walking a fine line here. On the one hand, they want to make sure people don't think of their products as some science experiment gone wild. But they're also aware that if they get bogged down in a prolonged battle over the nitty-gritty scientific details of cell profiles, they may end up creating that very perception. Even if their new age meat is perfectly fine and it's perfectly safe and has nothing to do with cancer, constantly having to reassure folks about that might not sit well with a lot of potential customers. As one executive in the industry humorously put it, this whole situation might bother some people. Interviews with dozens of current and former employees, executives, investors, analysts, and other insiders, as well as reviews of companies' regulatory filings and past statements, all of them make it very clear that the cultured meat industry is feeling uneasy about immortalized cells, and they're trying to avoid discussing it too much. One reason for this is that scientists aren't as quick as journalists to declare things as pretty much impossible. Even though there's an informal agreement among scientists that immortalized cells are safe, there just haven't been any long-term studies to back that up and put everyone's mind at ease. If cultured meat companies avoid addressing the issue, it could end up costing them, and by extension, the rest of us. These companies still have a way to go before they can make lab-grown meat affordable for the masses. But if they manage to overcome these challenges in the next couple of decades, they have the potential to revolutionize the trillion-dollar meat industry and how we interact with the animal kingdom. If they're unfairly branded as frankencancer or get rejected simply because they seem weird, then we might be stuck with heavily processed veggie burgers as our best meat alternative for a long time. Still, the word cancer is pretty scary, and the best way for cultured meat producers to prove that their products are safe is to give them to people and then check back 20, maybe 30 years later, asking, did you experience higher than normal cancer rates? But that's not a practical experiment. So the more likely path is to obtain government approvals and get their products into more plates. For now, it seems like these companies are choosing silence as their strategy, but by doing so, they're missing a crucial opportunity to demystify their products and prevent fear from spreading. With more than $1 billion in venture capital and the FDA support on the line, the direction this conversation takes can make a world of difference. When it comes to our appetites, novelty can be fascinating or it could be a real turnoff. Plus, there's the environmental impact to talk about. See, the way it's done now, lab-grown or cultivated meat's environmental impact is likely to be orders of magnitude higher than retail beef based on current and near-term production methods. That's definitely surprising given how lab-grown meat is supposed to be more environmentally friendly than beef because it's predicted to need less land, water, and greenhouse gases than raising cattle. But apparently, if the product continues to be produced using their current approach, which is something that's based in pharmaceutical production, it's going to be worse for the environment and even more expensive than conventional beef production. So yeah, I definitely think lab-grown meat still has a long way to go. If anybody were to offer me a lab-grown burger, I'd probably say no thanks. But that's just me personally. What about you guys? More to talk about in our next update. We'll see you there.